Tonight's symposium is sponsored both by the Hastings Center, which is a bioethics research institute in Garrison, New York, and by the Montefiore Medical Center and Albert Einstein College of Medicine Center for Bioethics. The Bioethics Center at Montefiore is headed up by my colleague, Dr. Tia Powell, and I'm going to be introducing Dr. Powell in a few minutes. Tia and I are thrilled by our collaboration tonight, and we're looking forward to many other opportunities for us to work together. The chairman of the Hastings Center Board, David Roscoe, is here this evening, and I'm not sure I don't think there are any other board members here, at least not yet, but I wanted to point David out. And other staff, there are a number of, Frank Gear is here, another board member. Anyone else good, okay. So I'm really delighted that Frank and David are here, and there are many Hastings Center staff around too. You could just raise your hand so that people will see who board and staff are, so that you can seek us out with any questions. If you like tonight and you want to get more involved with us, you can seek out one of these people and they can tell you some more about how to engage with us. As I said, this is the first live webcast of our public events, and so I want to welcome the people who are watching us on this very wet night in the comfort of their own home. Good call. And everyone can respond to what you hear or see through the hashtag LGBT New Ideas. So I'd like to start by just saying a few words about the Hastings Center. We are nonpartisan, independent. We're a research institute that examines a wide variety of ethical issues in health, healthcare, and life sciences research. We were the first bioethics institute in the country, and many people credit the Hastings Center with having established the field of bioethics. We're located in the beautiful central Hudson River Valley, and somebody else is doing my slides for me. There you have it. I like to tell New York City audiences that it is only 1 hour and 10 minutes up one of the most beautiful train rides in America, and that we have an open door policy. The problem is that I've got a signal to him and he's behind me. This is real. We welcome visitors. We especially like people to come at lunchtime and interact with us around all the very fascinating issues that we deal with. And the major way we work, however, is that we convene work groups of scholars in the humanities, philosophy, in law, in medicine, to debate and discuss contentious issues. Our scholars publish books and special reports, and we hold public events like this one. The special impetus for tonight's symposium is that we recently published a report on LGBT health and human rights. Dr. Powell and her colleague Mary Beth Foglia, who's an ethicist at the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, and I'm glad to see many people from that department here tonight. Mary Beth Foglia and Tia Powell came up with this idea and have served very ably as the co-editors of this special volume, which is a part of and affiliated with the Hastings Center Report, which is a journal that the Hastings Center publishes, a major journal in bioethics. So why did we take them up on this suggestion? After all, it might seem that the health and human rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered individuals is advancing very solidly, at least in this country, and at least around issues like same-sex marriage, which is enjoying growing support from the American public. So yes, it's true that North American cultural attitudes are shifting, but it's also indisputable that a great deal remains to be done. Globally, which we are not going to be talking about tonight, that could be the focus of another symposium. Globally, homosexual, bisexual, and transgendered individuals do not have basic human rights, and in many countries, they live in daily fear of arrest or attack. But even here in the US, we still have a long way to go. There's there's not clear federal policy. For example, we know, of course, gay and lesbian members of the military are now protected, but transgendered individuals are not. 29 states do not offer protection against discrimination based on sexual orientation, and 34 states don't protect against discrimination on the basis of gender identity. A 2011 report by the Institute of Medicine has called for more research on the health of LGBT persons and points out that disparities exist in their health status and well-being. Now, bioethics has always, from the very beginning, spoken truth to power. And in many ways, bioethics exists to keep the feet of medicine and healthcare to the fire. Hopefully, it is a fire that will ensure that the care of everyone, particularly vulnerable and stigmatized groups, and that will ensure that there's compassionate, fair, and non-discriminatory care. That's our intent in publishing this report and in holding this symposium tonight. We want to stimulate through these beginning actions a way to identify some action steps that can be taken to ensure compassionate and non-discriminatory care for LGBT individuals. Now, to help us in that task, we have lined up a very distinguished set of speakers. Let me tell you a little bit about how the time together is going to be organized. First, Dr. Powell will make a few remarks explaining why she and her colleague from the VA proposed this report. Then, award-winning author Mildred Solomon, then if Andrew is here, Andrew will speak next. And if not, he will have the closing remarks. He'll get the last word. In between, we have invited 3 outstanding panelists to comment on the talks and to share with us their own experiences. After Tia talks, I will introduce all 3 of them, but just so you know quickly, Jamie Lindemann Nelson, who is a philosopher, Robert Espinoza, who heads an advocacy organization around the health needs of aging gay elders, and Dr. Raju, who leads the largest municipal healthcare system in the country. So we have a lot in store for us. There's tremendous amounts of expertise. So with that, I'm going to introduce Tia and pass the baton to her. Dr. Powell is a psychiatrist. She directs the Center for she directs the Center for Bioethics at Montefiore and Albert Einstein College of Medicine. She also founded the Montefiore's master's program in bioethics. And she is a fellow, we're very proud to say, of the Hastings Center. Hastings Center Fellows, which number around 200 now, represent a very prestigious group of the world's most accomplished bioethicists, and Tia was elected to be a Hastings Center Fellow last year, I think. She served also as 4 years as the executive director of the New York State Task Force on Life and the Law. The task force here in New York has had a profound influence on important healthcare legislation in the state that has also served as a model for legislation nationally. And they were very fortunate to have Tia's leadership for a number of years. She currently serves on an Institute of Medicine work group, the Committee on the Public Health Dimensions of Cognitive Aging, which is something we might all need to think about, unfortunately. And she's also a senior advisor to Health and Human Services, the Department of Health and Human Services, on ethics and dementia. So, Tia, pass the baton.
Thank you, Millie, and I thank all of you for coming out this evening in this particularly heinous weather. I myself would have stayed home probably if that had been a reasonable choice. I want to thank you for coming, and I also want to thank my co-editor, Mary Beth Folia, who lives on the West Coast and could not be here physically, though we hope she is here with us in spirit this evening. Mary Beth and I took on the notion of doing this report because we felt that bioethics, and we blamed ourselves for this as bioethicists, had really dropped the ball in an important way. That we spend a lot of time thinking about errors that bioethics made in the early days vis-a-vis research subjects. In any course in bioethics, we'll talk about that. But essentially, no course in bioethics talks about the way that law and medicine served as the enforcement arm for society in terms of how LGBT people should live. So we thought that was a gap. Certainly other scholars do cover this. It's in family law issues, it's in gender studies. There are certainly people who work on these issues, but not primarily bioethicists. So we thought that was wrong. I'll shift gears now and talk about why I think bioethics can be useful in thinking about these issues. And I'll take just one tool that bioethics uses, a very simple tool, but like many simple tools, like a knife, it can be incredibly powerful. And that's really the fact-value distinction. So I'd like to think with you for a minute about how we in LGBT bioethics should separate values from facts. So I put to you that if we support LGBT human rights and dignity, we should proudly claim that view as based on our values. To the extent that we rely on scientific matters that I will argue are far from settled, I think we build our home on a shaky foundation. So let's talk politics. We're in New York City. We love to talk politics. Let's talk about New York City's First Lady, Chirlane McCray. So Chirlane McCray made incredible headlines in the recent election when there surfaced from her past a fascinating article from 1979 that she published in Essence magazine called, catchy title, I Am a Lesbian. So it was a very forceful, very impassioned article where she talked about the challenge of coming out as a Black woman attracted to other women. It was a bold stroke. It's hard to come out, the more so in 1979 as opposed to now. It made an incredible splash at the time, rightly so. It's a beautiful article. Time passes, she meets a nice fella, she gets married to Bill de Blasio, they have some kids. What do we do with this? How do we understand what's going on? Well, we have a couple of different options here. One is to say, well, maybe Chirlane McCray, I mean, she seems so thoughtful and forceful. Maybe she was just wrong. Maybe she doesn't know who she is. Maybe she was just wrong in 1979. That's one possibility. Or maybe, maybe she was really bi all the time. Maybe she's bi. She didn't know it. She saw she was attracted to women. She didn't know about the next chapter. Fine. Maybe she's bi. There are some people that argue that everybody's bi because it's a convenient theory that does away with the option of actually having to think very hard about other possibilities. I'm not sure I buy it. It's a bad pun, and I'm sorry for that. I didn't intend to do that. It just came out. Other people, not necessarily about Ms. McCray, put forward the quite offensive theory that people who have once been gay and then subsequently take up a heterosexual partner, in fact, they're just shamming. They're doing this because of the advantages of a heteronormative lifestyle. So Chirlane just saw for herself some social advantage in marrying a man. That's what she's doing. It's pretty offensive. Nor is there a lot of data that that particular person would be persuaded by that set of arguments. So what do we think about this? Well, all of these notions are pure speculation. Actually, we have no reasonable answer to this question. If you accept the concept of hello, welcome Andrew, how are you? If you accept the concept of self-identification, I'm not sure you should admit to having a view. Certainly, I would say that Chirlane McCray is what she chooses to say about who she is. It's really not for us to answer this question. I don't know that she chooses to answer it. I will say that the important point is that she should be able to live her life as she chooses, in dignity and freedom, with whom she chooses. That's really our point. I actually don't know and should not claim to know how she got there. It's not my business. And I don't think we should base our arguments for human rights upon a claim that pretends to know more than we should have any right to make. I don't know that we can say that about Chirlane McCray. I don't know that we can make such a claim about any of the many, many other people whose lives follow this pattern. Real life is chaotic. People do different things. We do change. That's actually one of the better things about us, that we are capable of change. I would hate to pretend that's no longer true. So I would say we shouldn't build our arguments for LGBT human rights in a way that requires someone like McCray to have taken one and only one of the possible paths for how she got to where she is that way. So what I'm talking about is the born that way hypothesis. Now, it's been a really helpful hypothesis. I think it's been expedient. I think it actually has played a very positive role in promoting gay marriage. So I don't take anything away from it in that sense. I'm just not sure it's accurate. I'm just not sure the science is there, and I'm also not quite sure that I know what it means. I'm not sure what it means for an infant to be born gay. Infants are adorable. They chew on their feet, though. They actually don't know the difference from themselves and other objects. There's a lot of, to say that an infant is in some way born gay is a really puzzling statement. What would that actually mean? Of course it can unfold. But I would say that rather than being born that way should be taken as a fact, it's something that we use to uphold a value. What we're trying to say is that people have a right to live as they would like. And there's nothing wrong with basing a stance about human rights on values. That is actually what we should do. So if you ask me, is there a role for genetics in the development of sexual orientation or gender identity? Probably. I mean, that sounds right. There's certainly some role for biology. Do I know what it is? Do I think someone else knows exactly what it is? I think that's pretty doubtful. I'll tell you, I think it's very unlikely that a single gene determines anything so complicated as gender identity or sexual orientation. Genes don't mostly work that way. So it would be very unusual. Could we or should we prevent scientists from studying these kinds of things? I actually don't know how you would go about doing that, but I wouldn't want to try. Actually, some of the best science we have on these issues is put forward by people who are LGBT scientists, if you will, who, like other scholars, are interested in questions that relate to their own identity. So I don't know why you would stamp out creativity, although it's true that it's hard to say where scientific knowledge may go. I'm not saying that gender identity and orientation are simply choices, that one may elect this. If that were true, in countries where you could be killed for making the wrong choice, presumably people would simply not make that choice. And yet we find that people do live difficult lives as LGBT people, even in countries where this is really very challenging. I will say I think it's suspect that to some extent we only believe people that say they've gone from straight to gay, and we're very suspicious about people who say that they were gay and now they're straight. I think that's very intellectually problematic. I don't know that we can get away with that. I don't think that that reflects a sensed truth for the lives of some people in our community. And I don't want we who support gay rights to be in the business of telling people that they are wrong about who they are when this is their experience. I shouldn't be taking on that stance. It's not ethically sound. So I'll say that I think that support has to be for individual liberty. Our arguments need to be based on liberty. US history and our rights are importantly based on the freedom of religion. And that is absolutely a choice. We have a precedent for things that are not inborn, being things that we support absolutely. And again, I'm not saying that identity and orientation are a choice. I'm just saying that I don't know that born that way is necessary for us to support these rights. We should be able to claim an identity that may be based on a category assigned to us at birth, or maybe it's something we later seize upon. Maybe we discover that this category is importantly linked to our identity. Maybe we reject many common categories. But we should be able to evolve with our own sense of self-understanding, whether that's based in biology or some other complex combination of factors, too rich, too subtle, to be dissected in any one particular instance. So I'm arguing today that I don't believe we can clearly determine which aspects of orientation and gender identity may be present at birth, at least in some form, and which may develop over time by complex winding paths. It wasn't that long ago that gender, orientation, for that matter, race, were all thought to be incredibly clear, obvious, easily distinguished, and never-changing categories. The more we look, the less crisp any of those categories today appear. They really don't stand up. So I'm looking forward to our discussion with our distinguished panel, all of whom, new friends and old, I really welcome today. I'd say we have a lot of work to do in LGBT bioethics in our society. I can only hope that we learn to work together to build a society that values freedom and dignity for us all. And that's a fact. Thank you for coming.
We're going to hold questions, so keep mental notes. Thank you so much, Tia. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Andrew Solomon. Andrew wrote the foreword to this report, and several of us think it was really a landmark essay. If you haven't read it, You must read it immediately after. He has laid out an argument that is just beautiful in terms of its argumentation and in such elegant prose. So we were deeply moved by his contribution to the report and thrilled that he was able to join us tonight. Andrew is professor of psychology in the psychiatry department at Columbia. He's a special advisor on LGBT affairs at Yale University's Department of Psychiatry. And he is the author of numerous books, most recently, Far from the Tree, Parents, Children, and the Search for Identity. Far from the Tree won 18 national awards. And his previous book, The Noonday Demon, won the National Book Award and was a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize. It's now published in 24 languages. Andrew.
Thank you very much, and sorry to have been a little late materializing. In 1991, George Canguilhem, who was a historian of science, who has worked a lot on adaptation, said, "Diversity is not disease. The anomalous is not the pathological." So I think we start in an investigation of the bioethics of LGBTQ identities and experiences with the idea that while they are clearly anomalous, they are no longer assumed to be pathological. And then we see what follows from there. There has obviously been enormous progress in the area of rights for LGBT people. But the erosion of long-standing prejudice is very slow, and as Tia just pointed out, it's certainly not something that's happening on a universal basis. I think social science, physical science, philosophy, religion, and innumerable other fields all have bearing on the emergence of healthy LGBTQ identities. And I'm going to return, I think, over and over again to that question of identity. And bioethics is, of course, implicated in revolutionizing attitudes and in determining what we do with those changed attitudes. And I also started, as Tia was just talking about in her presentation, with this question of whether being gay or being trans or being queer or being bisexual are variously things that are chosen or whether they are inherent qualities. It used to be that the primary question was nature-nurture. Then the primary question seemed to be the tractable-intractable question. And those two questions are very much enmeshed. So one is to say, are you gay because of the uterine environment or because of some complex of genes or for some other biological reason which is established before you've actually entered the world or shortly thereafter? Or are you gay because you grew up in a household, I mean, as historically would have it, with an overbearing mother and a passive father or some other sort of circumstance along those lines, vice versa. But there's also then the question, which is always in with that, which is it changeable or is it unchangeable? And there is a sort of strange logic which seems to have set in, according to which if we accept that it's nature rather than nurture, which is what people tend to accept now, that the corollary of that is seen to be that it is intractable rather than changeable. And I would question that correlation. I think it may be that those things are all true, but I don't think they necessarily imply one another. There is this sense somehow that if being gay is a choice, that it's acceptable to much of the population for there to be a great deal of prejudice enacted against gay people, and that gay people don't necessarily warrant rights in particular. And if it's not a choice, then those poor people, they couldn't do anything about it. Let's be terribly nice to them, just the way we are to anyone else with an undesirable disability. And that has been a politically useful perception, as people have thought that people were made that way, that same phrase that you just used. There has been increasing tolerance associated with that point of view. But I think there are a lot of dangers in that disability model. I think there are dangers, and I will try to enumerate some of them. I periodically, when I'm speaking even on other topics, quote from an article in Time magazine in 1966, which was then the view of the mainstream. The magazine did a whole study of gay people and concluded, even in purely non-religious terms, homosexuality represents a misuse of the sexual faculty